All right, so we are recording now. Hi everyone. I'm here with Jen Perelman, who is running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now that is a name that a lot of progressives are familiar with, and not many have good associations with. So, what inspired you to enter the race, and how's it going?
Well, I mean, to say that I was recently inspired to enter the race wouldn't be accurate. I mean, Debbie has been my congressperson for 16 years. And before that, she was my Florida state legislator. So I've been watching the transition of her over the years. I mean, I know most people know her best from 2016 from the DNC fiasco, but she's just been a corporate money taker for years and working against what I think to be the best interest of the collective. So I've always had it in my mind that we need somebody in there that isn't corporate bought. We need somebody in there who doesn't want this as a career. And then after 2016, I actually Dem exited. I was beyond done with the Dems, and I was a volunteer on every single presidential campaign since before I was old enough to vote. So I was just done after they cheated Bernie. And then I reaffiliated to do this. And really, after 2018, I saw that there was an opportunity for non-corporatists to be able to get in. That was a good year for us as non-corporate people, because I think we went from like 9 to 40 between those two sessions of non-corporate people. And so I felt that timing wise, that the general public is getting more hip to this corporate takeover, and that there's more room for us to get in. And really, it's been going very well. I mean, I'm sure you're aware that there are definitely a lot of people that do not like my opponent. And so in a lot of ways, I do get a lot of support that's based off of that, as opposed to for me, which, that's fine. We'll take it. But it was going a lot better before we had to be shut down from canvassing. So, I mean, right now we're pretty much strictly relying on this, social media, and phone banking.
That's something I've heard. I've been doing a series of these conversations with sort of upstart candidates, outsider candidates who are trying to work their way in. And a common thread is that the coronavirus pandemic has just completely wiped out their ground game, made it impossible. So how is your campaign adapting?
Actually better than I would have anticipated. And I think that has to do with the simultaneous exit of Bernie from campaigning, because we picked up a lot of his volunteers across the country that are phone banking for us. So that sort of happened, at the same time as this. So we were able to transition to having a lot of volunteers phone banking, but nothing is comparable to canvassing. And we'll find out. I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a playbook for this about, campaigning during a pandemic, but we will find out. Eventually, all of our campaigns, all of us grassroots people will find out if it can be done without a real ground game.
Well, it's definitely interesting, and it definitely puts you at a disadvantage, and people in your position at a disadvantage. That said, this is for the foreseeable. This is what it is. How bad is it down in Florida?
You mean in terms of us campaigning, or just in general?
Just in general, like how have you seen a lot of immediate fallout from COVID down in Florida?
Now, economically, yes. Yes, we have had probably a higher death rate than some of the other states, based on a combination of factors in terms of our governor and just the general nature of the populace down here. So we have had, and we also, in my district, there is a testing site. And so we're getting a lot more cases diagnosed, but that's because we have a testing site right here. So, that's kind of a hard one to know, but economically, it's a disaster. The unemployment website, from my understanding, is just not functioning. The majority of people that even are able to get unemployment are not able to get through this system and get their money. Many people have not received their stimulus checks. So from an economic standpoint, this is devastating. And the small businesses in this area, and probably everywhere, there are going to be so many businesses that quite honestly never recover from this.
I bring this up because I saw your tweet last night, I believe, or the response to the takeover in Michigan, the state house, by the protesters, and I thought you had a very sober take, which is that this is what happens when government doesn't adequately uh, insulate people from the economic fallout, and yet has a stay-at-home order. And I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot more of that now as the crisis continues. People start to, as they start to really feel the strain, or see it around them, we're probably going to have more of these protests. Uh, what do you think government needs to be doing right now that could make this better?
Immediately be sending money to people, what other countries seem to be doing. I definitely support Pramila Jayapal's legislation where we're paying for payrolls instead of paying for unemployment. I don't think we should have let all these people become unemployed. I think that we should have adopted something similar to what they did in the UK, like what Pramila Jayapal is presenting, and have us being subsidizing employers' payrolls and having people be furloughed as opposed to being unemployed. It's we're paying for people one way or another to exist. It makes infinitely more sense to keep them employed, not just to mention the morale aspect of it. It's a serious economic aspect because it might seem like a better thing to do in the short run, but in the long run, I just see it as much more disastrous and costly to have everybody be unemployed.
You know, it does seem like we are looking at the worst economic disaster maybe ever.
Ever.
Maybe, yeah. And what are you seeing as some of the shortcomings, in the current administration's approach, and then of the Democratic Party's response?
Well, to me, those are kind of one and the same. I don't know that they would be any different either way. Somebody has to be the good guy and someone has to be the bad guy. It's like Mick resistance. So let's be real. It's a corporate response. So the corporate response has been to, as per usual, give a ton of money to the people that need it the least and say to the people at the bottom, well, it'll trickle down to you. We know that this does not work. It never works. It doesn't work. What we need is trickle up economics, not trickle down economics, trickle up economics. If everybody that was a consumer or able to be a consumer had a viable social safety net and disposable income, that is the way that we stimulate the economy. And the reality is that people like you and people like me, we know this. We know this because it's common sense. But we also know what's keeping that from happening is the corporations that have bought our government and are funneling all the money to the top. Meanwhile, keeping us distracted, blaming everybody else, and trying to keep us to keep, punching down. And it's fundamentally the wrong approach because capitalism cannot survive without consumers.
That's it. We do. Uh, money does not seem to be trickling down. It does seem to be pooling. I have to say. I think that is an accurate assessment. So, what do we do about it? Because right now it seems that there is a shortage in experts um, and policy wonks on the left. Like the institutions just aren't there. Like the center, the sort of neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party, or centrist wing, whatever you want to call it. Um, they have the think tank infrastructure that exists there, um, that sort of perpetuates these policies, but we don't see that really on the left. So how do you, obviously, as one person, um, start to change that? I mean, are there groups that you've looked to work with, in your candidacy, that maybe you would consider bringing on board as policy, if you get elected?
I mean,
Um,
I think that there's no shortage actually of good policy. It's just not getting any attention and it's not put in the forefront and it's never brought to the floor because not enough people are supporting it. So we could just look at Medicare for all, for example. There's a perfectly good Medicare for all single payer bill sitting right now, sitting there, and it just can't get enough support to go anywhere. So, even just the concept of a Green New Deal will never get the legs to go anywhere because most people are on corporate payrolls and they won't even attempt to put through policies that would dare challenge things like the military industrial complex or the fossil fuel industry. And that's ultimately what the problem is. It's not a shortage of ideas. There's a lot of good ideas. We just don't hear about them, and people don't get a voice to be a proponent of them because that is stifled. And a lot of which by things like mainstream media, but just in terms of if there's not enough representatives to support a bill, you're probably not going to hear about it. It's not going to go anywhere. Probably nobody's going to really push it. And that's the problem. We have to get enough people in there that are non-corporate, that will truly look out for what's in the best interest of people and that aren't there for their own careers. So for me, when I look at a Green New Deal and I look at the economic justice aspect of it, the idea of putting people to work in alternative energies and redoing our infrastructure and making a solar initiative and all the things, there is no shortage of potential employment for people. So this is exactly the situation that FDR was faced with back after that depression. And now we're heading into another one. And why would we not want to use a jobs program? So I believe in things like a federal jobs guarantee. I believe in a minimum $15 minimum wage, but really it should be higher, tied to cost of living. And then when you put that in combination with single payer healthcare, those three things alone will eliminate a significant amount of burden from the people in this country.
So as somebody who's coming up and as somebody who is facing an incumbent who's been in for years and years and years, how do you, at a time like this when people are arguably more focused on just getting through each week, making rent and that sort of thing, those sorts of concerns, how do you convince them that to invest in your campaign, invest their time, invest their energy?
Well, in getting people to invest the time and energy, that's not the hard part for me personally. I have a really hard time asking people for money. I hate asking people for money, and that is really hard right now. But the key point that we are making, and actually people that are seeking us out, is that this time, if nothing, proves how important the programs that we're talking about would be and what change it would offer to this country. So I think that what's happening is while we lose the ability to canvass, we've gained control of the conversation. We've gained the content, because now it's clear that it doesn't work for healthcare to be tied to employment. It does not work for us to have sick people walking around that can't afford to go get tested and treated. So you're only as healthy as your sickest person. And I think people, while they are definitely in a bad economic situation right now, are realizing that it's not ever going to get better until we bring people in there that are looking out for their best interests. So on the one hand, yes, it's a hard time to ask people to give. But on the other hand, it's a really good time for us to show that our policies and our ideas are the kind of things that will keep this from being as devastating as it would be in the future.
Several of the candidates I've spoken to have mentioned that their campaigns have been have sort of shifted gears a little bit and are trying to connect people that they reach out to. They're doing like check-ins to see just how people are doing, and if people need help, trying to connect them with the services that they need. Has your campaign done that at all, or?
Oh yeah, we've only really done that. Since we've not been canvassing, we are only phone banking has been 2 people in district checking on them and seeing if we can connect them with services. We are only now just starting to maybe even consider switching some of our out-of-state phone, doing some out-of-state phone banking for some fundraising. So we've only been doing that, but my campaign is a service-based campaign. I started something called Jen Core, I want to say it was like 8 months ago. And all of my volunteers do community service. Up until this pandemic, we were already doing food banks, working in the veterans nursing home, outreach. I always was, when we were canvassing, one of the things that we were asking is, how can we help you? We go to meetings and say, how can we help you? So I've been running a service campaign the whole time.
And what have you been hearing from people in your district? I mean, what are some of the things you've been hearing?
Mostly just frustration in dealing with the current administration, both state and federal, and people really feeling scared and abandoned. So it's, this is a very scary time. And even for people that are not normally so close to the bottom rung, are feeling just how close they actually might be. And, when you live in a country where 3/4 of the people can't afford a $400 emergency and most people are living paycheck to paycheck, this is the inevitable outcome of this type of situation. And we have no social safety net. So people are really scared. We don't have any sort of rent freeze. We don't have any sort of mortgage freeze. We have no relief of anything. And a $1,200 one-time payment that many people still haven't received. So people are scared. And then you also have a lot of people who are the comfortable people that don't necessarily see it that way, but we're trying to make everybody understand the gravity of the situation.
And obviously this crisis sort of took us, we were very unprepared, to say the least.
Yeah.
But we were more than immediately unprepared, more than the administration left us unprepared. I think we were systemically vulnerable as well, in a way that perhaps many Americans did not realize until this happened. And in fact, it's even hard to find examples of people on the left making a case that, like, well, in an emergency, our plan is better. Like, this sort of blindsided everybody across the political spectrum. But now, as we're seeing shortages of medical supplies in hospitals, and we're seeing sick people having to go, had to go into work, and now people aren't getting the help that they need, so they want to return to work, and we don't even have a treatment, let alone a vaccine, or widespread testing. Do you think, and you sort of answered this a little bit, but I figured I would ask anyway. Do you think that this is like a pivotal moment in our history? I mean, are you getting the sense that this is like there's no turn, like right now we have to go one way or another way, and there's no turning back?
Yeah, I do. I think this is and you know what? People have always said that every election year, this is the most important election in our lifetime. I mean, look, we always think that the moment we're in is a very pivotal moment. But what we have right now is an amazing opportunity that is being put in front of us as progressives to really, I hate to say take advantage of a situation, but kind of, and really use this to drive home the importance of having a social safety net for people. And I think the more people that are that much closer to scraping the bottom rung and being scared of being homeless and realizing how close we all are to that, I think we are going to be getting more support for these things, which we know are not even that radical in the first place. I mean, that's the truth, is none of these ideas are that radical.
Now, something I've been asking everybody about, and so I'm going to ask you about it as well, is do you think that there's also a teachable moment on trade policy?
Absolutely.
In the middle of all of this?
Oh, that's one of the things I've been saying from the beginning, is we have a serious supply chain problem in this country. I mean, we've outsourced everything. Now, I am okay with trade. I have no problem with free trade, but it shouldn't be at the expense of our own industry. And it definitely shouldn't be at the expense of things that we're capable of doing and that we can be successful doing. And when we did the trade deals that we did, it was not in the best interest of American workers. We all know that, whether we're talking about NAFTA or the TPP. The trade deals that we have been looking at over the past 40 years have completely been against the best interests of labor in this country. And people on the left recognize that. And then the other side of that is, so now we don't produce anything here, and now we're completely dependent on other places. But I would like to point out that in a global pandemic like this, let's say we were completely self-contained and didn't have trade with other countries, and we were completely isolated and we produced everything we needed. And then we get hit with this pandemic. And now we don't have any way of getting things from other places either. So I see the need for trade, but not to be completely dependent on other countries.
Right. It sort of cripples our ability to stockpile ventilators when our source is the first country hit.
Exactly. And and it isn't so much just the lack of production, right? It's also the way we've arranged deals with other nations. And we know on their end is not in the best interest of their workers either. It's all extremely underhanded and nefarious that serves only very few people. And I think more people are catching on to that now.
So how do people on the left have these conversations without sounding or without being dismissed as sort of loony or like out there, because we saw some of that this election with Bloomberg looking at Bernie Sanders and saying you're a communist. Like how do you get around? I mean, obviously that's an extreme example, and nobody who and nobody under like 50 really gives a shit. But like, how do you get around this perception that the left is just, there's kooky people who, oh, everything is a conspiracy, a corporation? Like, how do you penetrate that?
I really just talk the truth, and I don't worry about the labels. The labels aren't what's important. When you explain to people, and most of our policies are economically prudent as well. And that is something that people are not really, talking about when they say it's hard to convince people. What was the most recent study that Medicare for All saves, what, $5 trillion over 10 years? I mean, we know that it saves us money. We know it's the economically prudent thing to do. And it's just a matter of the talking points and the brainwashing of corporate propaganda, right? And so how do you get in there and sort of deprogram people? And it's a process. I mean, we've been doing it for a year. It's in every message we put out. It's educating people just as much as even trying to get them to support me. I feel like I spend an inordinate amount of time educating people on these are the issues, and this would be the best way to serve the most amount of people. And when you take away the labels, it's interesting because I go to Republican meetings, or at least I did go to meetings, but and associate with people that you would think would be completely on the opposite side. And yet we have a lot of common ground. And I think that when you're talking about just regular people will just talk when you're not in their face about calling them deplorables and, completely condescending them in some sort of intellectual elitist way. But when you approach people, I can go to the Elks Club and hang out at the tiki bar with the guys, and most of them are going to be Republicans. Most of them are veterans, all different likes and walks of people. And when you talk to people, everybody really kind of just wants justice of some form. And that is a common thread. So I think we have a lot more in common than people realize. And when you stop name calling and putting people down, it's amazing what you can accomplish.
And are you seeing, I mean, are you getting the sense that there is an appetite for change around you? I mean, Florida is an interesting state, a storied state, and sort of a barometer in a way for the direction that things are going to go for the rest of the country. So are you getting a sense that people are, that there is sort of this awakening that it would take to first of all, put you in office and also I think make a significant change around the country?
I'd like to say I'm cautiously optimistic. And I say that because while we do have a diverse district in some ways, it is definitely gerrymandered blue. It has traditionally been more of what I call a Biden blue than a Bernie blue. But over the past, I'd say 5 years, we have seen, and this is just statistically speaking, an outgoing of the older people and an influx of the younger people. So we have a lot more, like my campaign, my volunteers, I've got a lot of college students, a lot of high school students, and these kids are angry, and rightfully so. And on the other hand, we do have a certain clutch of establishment, neoliberal, older, I hate to say boomer age people in our district that are just the tried and true blue no matter who. And so what I say is things are going to change. It's like a balance, right? So things are going to change when the amount of the young people, and not just young, but young at mind, progressive thinking, when they outnumber, and it's happening. Like I said, we went from 9 to 40, and now we're, in another cycle, and I think we're going to increase it again. Excuse me.
You all right? You're not sick?
Yeah, no. I'm not sick. So I feel cautiously optimistic. There are definitely a lot of people that are supportive here and want change. And yet we still have, a certain amount of the old guard. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, 2020 is going to be, it'll be an interesting year, especially because it does seem like you guys just had your legs cut out from underneath you.
We did.
And I mean, that is you know the expression, may you live in interesting times. Well, we were not brought up, we were not raised for this world, for the world that we're in right now. We were not prepared for this
No.
world, and we were left very yeah. It's sort of is everyone in your family okay? Are you?
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's something that I mean, we're very, very fortunate, and I always say in so many aspects of my life, I am very, very privileged, and this is no exception to that. I mean, I'm not worried about being homeless or hungry. That's not something that's on my radar, and that is a privilege to have that. So, I'm in an exceptionally good way. And I wish everybody were able to be in that way. And that's what I'm fighting for. That's the whole point. Everybody should be able to go to sleep at night and know that they can take care of their kids with food and clothing and shelter and medicine. I mean, that's just it.
And no COVID. No, nobody has.
No, my cousin's husband had it and he recovered. I mean, I've known some people that have had it. Jordan Sheraton is recovering from it. So like I've known some people having it, but nobody in my personal sphere has been fatal.
Yeah, that's good. I'm happy to hear that. It's I'm in the same boat.
Where are you?
I'm in Brooklyn.
Okay. So you're in like the epicenter.
Yeah, I'm in Crown Heights. The sirens are pretty constant, and I live in an area where there are a lot of necessary like workers.
Yeah.
So it's pretty busy still. But
which is why it won't go away anytime soon.
Yeah, a few, like when we started this interview, just before you came into the Zoom meeting, there was the like daily cheering for the shift change of the medical workers. It's freaky. I mean, here I think we lead the nation in New York in terms of COVID. We have freezer truck morgues and all sorts of horrible things here.
It has not reached that. It is not like that down here. We don't have overflowing hospitals and a strained system. We don't have that horror story that you're seeing in terms of the medical workers. We're not having that here at that level.
That's good. The hope is that it stays that way. Obviously.
Yeah, we're not. My husband's a physician. He doesn't do ER, but he's frequently in and around the hospitals. He's still working. He's still having patients. And he has told me that he's not seeing anything crazy, that it's not, people in the halls, and he hasn't seen anything like that. And he covers, I want to say 5 hospitals.
That's good. That's really good.
So, I mean, and people are getting this here. I'm not saying that they're not, and people are dying, but we're not, our infrastructure is not pushed to the brink.
Right. We happen to get it at still the weather is colder, and I think we got it at a very unfortunate time here. And but New York is a state that we expanded Medicaid. We are like the perfect test state for the Affordable Care Act. The efficacy of the Affordable Care Act in the face of a pandemic, and we've been overrun.
But didn't Cuomo want to cut your Medicaid?
Yes.
There's all sorts of problems.
Well, yes, we also have Cuomo, who's cutting hospitals and cutting Medicaid. But in terms of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, we are not one of the states that did not implement.
Right. So if it were to be working, it would be working there.
It should be, you would think. But we still, it
can't work as long as there's a profit motive in healthcare.
It can't work as long as people don't go to a doctor when they're sick. If you can't afford to see a doctor when you're sick, and you can't afford to miss work because you'll lose what insurance you have, or you can't afford to miss work because your rent depends on it. And you go in what do you think is going to happen? And then when you don't have domestic supply chains for necessary medical equipment, kind of it does seem like all of the connections between these issues that maybe weren't as clear before have become crystal clear now.
I'm hoping.
I can imagine.
To me, it's pretty clear. I mean, I would never venture to say that single payer healthcare doesn't have its own issues. Of course it does. All countries have issues with their systems, their economic systems, their healthcare systems. There's issues. But certainly, there are countries that are handling it infinitely better than we are. And I don't mean just the COVID crisis, I mean just in general, how they take care of their citizens. And we all see that. So there's a variety of different options and ways to implement single payer. But to say it's something we can't do is just not accurate. It's a lie.
It's staggering, isn't it? It does seem.
Well, what's more frustrating to me, and I tell this to people all the time, it's infinitely more frustrating to me having to convince a Democrat that healthcare is a human right than having to talk to a Republican about that.
This is one of the reasons that I wanted to reach out to you, and I wanted to have this face to face, because I have seen your account a lot, and I've seen your takes a lot, and I think we agree on a lot of very, very basic things that are just not where the conversation is at today, but where it probably should be. And it is frustrating because you do have Democrats who should know better or should do better. The party as an institution in American politics should probably do better.
They've lost their way. No, they didn't lose their way. They were bought. I mean, essentially, they were purchased. And I tell people all the time that, when people say, how do you plan on changing the Democratic Party? And I'm like, it's so interesting that that's somehow on me to change. I'm the same way they were when I joined them, when I was, turned 18 years old. I'm pro-labor, pro-environment, and anti-war. None of that has changed. So, this is supposed to be the party of labor. We have no labor party in this country right now. And that is a travesty. So, it isn't just that we only have two parties. It's that neither of them represents labor. How can that possibly work for any extended period of time? That's what we're seeing.
And how is it that in the middle of a crisis, like the coronavirus, like the COVID-19 pandemic, that neither major party, the leadership of neither major party, supports a plan for universal health care?
Right.
That is a staggering,
or more importantly than that, how is it that 72% of the American people want single payer health care, and yet they won't even discuss it? That to me is insubordination. I look at that Congress as insubordinate employees, and it's outrageous to me. If it were something that were just this real radical idea and only like a handful of people were behind it, fine, I get it. You're talking the majority of Republicans support single payer healthcare system. So the fact that they're not doing it, and that's what we want, and not just with healthcare, but with lots of things, that's insubordination. It really is. And we need to address it as such.
So your opponent is one of those Democrats who does not support Medicare for all, and who has not been, granted, I've only had one interaction with Ms. Wasserman Schultz, and that was during 2016, right as the perception that she was biased was starting to bubble up to the surface. This was before the email leaks. And I think it was at the Brooklyn debate. And I think she had just published her New York Times op-ed about how it was such a big moment for women. And I asked her, I was like, would you consider resigning to unite the party, in November? And I will never forget, she was like, that wouldn't unite. I'm not resigning, and that wouldn't unite the party anyway. And a few months later, she obviously did resign, but she was right that it didn't unite the party.
Yeah, it wouldn't unite the party because, well, it quieted down the distraction of her. It at least took it removed the spectacle from the room, is what it did. But there is no unifying when there's no party that's representing labor. There's nothing to unify behind. And that's really the problem. They're not giving me anything to come behind. You want me to support Joe? Okay. well, what is he offering me in terms of my policy issues that matter to me? Even if I'll give him this, let's say he offered me one of them. Maybe I'd consider that. Maybe I'd say, you know what, at least I get that, but no, none of it. That's not, there's no unification behind something that isn't. There is no there.
Well, right. This
And
is what I wanted to ask you, because your
yeah,
opponent is one of those Democrats who doesn't support even Medicare for all, even now. I mean,
yeah.
you would think that this would be like, okay, everybody gets a do-over because now we have this big crisis. So how do you feel now? But even now, you have these Democrats remain unchanged. So my question is there really, is this a political party anymore? Is it really, or is it two parties, or is it three? I mean,
I think of it as one corporate party. It's just like a
but
color
you're not
war.
part of a corporate party. I mean,
No,
you're the,
I won't. And truthfully, if we didn't have the gerrymandered district that we have down here, and we didn't have closed primaries and all the things that we have that kind of make our elections less fair, then I wouldn't probably be running as a Democrat. But then I start to think about it, and it really angers me because, like I was saying before, I actually am what a Democrat is supposed to be. I've always been that. So, why I kind of feel like they should maybe leave and go form some, neoliberal corporatist party. But unfortunately, they bought the brand. They bought our brand. They bought the name, essentially. Corporate America bought both parties. And there's one party. There's one party with two different colors in this sort of like fictitious color war situation. And yet all roads lead to the same corporate donors. So I also support ranked choice voting. That's another thing that I think would be really helpful in giving a voice to, third parties. Not only do I support third parties, but I support getting rid of all closed primaries. I think everything that we can do to open the process, include more people and include more ideas is better, not worse. And the only reason that's not going to happen is two private clubs that have completely taken over the electoral process in this country in such a way that it is just prohibitive for any other voices to be heard.
so one of the problems that, or one of the things that media has suggested, that I've heard suggested, is that Bernie Sanders faced issues because he ran against the Democratic Party, and that he should moderate his message. He should have moderated his message to appeal to more Democrats, because that could have secured him the nomination. Obviously, you are, a firebrand progressive, somebody who supports this largely the same agenda that Sanders supported, and that agenda is popular. But do you worry about losing Democratic voters with some of the rhetoric?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this all the time. There's certain issues that I definitely am walking a very fine line, because I can't please the people all the way on the left, and I can't please the moderates in the middle, and you can't. But so this is what I do is I just be me. I just be me. I just speak my truth. I say, these are my policies, which, by the way, are not radical. So that's like what I was saying. If these were radical things, then I would understand people's hesitation and concern, but they're not. And I'm tired of them being labeled as such. And I reject that completely. I'm not that far left. I'm not crazy radical. And these are just ideas that belong in a civilization. So, if I lose some centrists because I am talking about policies that ought to be Democratic platform policies in the first place, it's unfortunate. But to me, then they're not really Democratic people. If you're not, what makes a party if not its platform and its values? Is it just because they paint the color blue? Or does it stand for something? And if it does, what is that? And when you start talking to people like that and you really put it to them, people are understanding more than you might think when you say, well, what does that mean? What does a Democrat do? What does a Democrat stand for? And I think we do kind of need to reclaim that and stop letting that be, owned by just one corporate group of people, which is what it is right now.
So if I could shift,
Definitely not easy.
I can imagine. I mean, it's a hard. It seems to be a difficult wire to walk on. But I want to shift gears a little bit. to Joe Biden. To get you to wade into the national discussion a little bit. Obviously, as you know, he has been accused now of being inappropriate or creepy by, now it is 9 women. One of those women has accused him of sexual assault, and another just today came out and accused him of complimenting her breasts when she was 14 years old. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I didn't, but not remotely surprised. I mean, I think that the floodgates are now going to open, and it's just going to start to pile on, is what I think.
So, what do you make of the allegations? Should they be taken should they be taken seriously? And what should happen? Should Joe Biden step down? Should he be replaced? And if so, by whom?
Yeah, my thoughts on this are pretty basic, and I'm pretty consistent. I've always been consistent. This is exactly the same way that I felt about the Brett Kavanaugh situation. First of all, everybody needs to be listened to and heard. And I heard all the neoliberals saying that comment like that actually means something in and of itself. Well, it doesn't. Everybody needs to be heard. Great. I don't know what that means. But what I do know is that we are not talking about a criminal case. This is not a criminal case. Nobody's convicting anybody. Nobody's taking anybody's life or their liberty. And nobody has a constitutional right to be the Democratic nominee or a Supreme Court justice. These are job interviews. I don't need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I really don't. I can't speak as to the veracity of Tara Reade's claims. My gut is that it's very, very believable. I have no reason not to. That being said, as an attorney, that's obviously not enough to just, convict somebody. But what people are not understanding, again, is that this is not a criminal trial. It's a job interview. And when you're an employer and you're hiring somebody, if I'm reading a resume and I call a reference and someone tells me about that they've accused this person of that, that's it for me. I'm done. There's other people that are qualified, in some cases, probably more qualified than others. And there is no reason for us to be playing games with the highest job in our country with someone with this kind of stuff hanging over them. And quite honestly, we've been looking at photos and videos of him for years, touching and doing things that are just inappropriate. There have been numerous. I remember Lucy Flores' allegation that he came up and put his hands on her shoulders and sniffed her hair and kissed her head. And I remember at the time thinking the level of arrogance and entitlement that he must just feel is he is just so allowed to just put his hands wherever he wants to. And it has nothing to do with sexual assault. It's entitlement is what that is. And that in and of itself actually is enough for me to not want somebody to have that job, just that level of just, and it's ironic that it's so many of the same people that are constantly bashing Trump for the same lechy behavior, mind you. I mean, I'm not, saying it's okay by anybody, but the selective outrage is just, to me, it is a suffocating level of hypocrisy by these women. And I'm not going to name names because it's just not prudent for me to do so. We all know who these women are that were so into the Me Too and Christine Blasey Ford, and where are they now? Talking about making up stories about the New York Times doing a thorough investigation. That's what they're all doing now. So not only do I just generally believe Tara Reade, I don't think we really need to be spending our time and resources digging to the bottom of this. We don't need beyond a reasonable doubt proof. We don't. So that's my take.
Well, I do appreciate it. It's obviously it's a hot button issue right now, and it
should be. We've been dealing with this forever. And I'm not a Me Too person. I'm not a vagina hat wearer. I'm generally not a fan of movements in general. I think they contribute to groupthink, and I'm not really big on that. I'm not on a bandwagon or whatever. But what I do know is that I have not met an adult woman in my life that has not been violated in some way. In some way. Some are, could just be sexual harassment at the workplace or somebody just making you feel uncomfortable, everything up until forcible rape. So when you talk about the likelihood of things like this happening, most women are going to go, yeah, because that's what happens. And I by no means think all men are offenders, not even close. I know that all women have been violated, but I also know for a fact that men are not all offenders. So, but it's not about a movement. It's just common sense. For every rat you see, there's 50 you don't. And when you have that much evidence and allegations, whether it's photographic or video evidence of just uncomfortable, unwanted touching, or just all these allegations, that's sufficient for me. It really is. It's sufficient for me to disqualify somebody from the highest job in the country.
And so you would see him replaced or step.
Oh, absolutely. And quite honestly, even if I were a fan, it's just not a good thing to do in terms of having a Democrat win and beat Trump. It's just not prudent. It's not a smart strategy. It's a losing strategy. My understanding is that he is already below where Hillary was at the same time in that race in 16, that he is already below that now with his level of approval and popularity.
There was a recent poll I saw that had him down 6 points in a week.
Okay, so this is my point. So if he's already at a point now lower than where Hillary was at this point in her race, and we haven't even, and he's not even the nominee yet, right? So we're just talking, he's just getting stuff from the left. He hasn't begun to get hit from the right. And I just think that it's a lost cause. So from a strategic standpoint, I think that the Democrats would be better suited to replace him. But that would be, again, assuming that they absolutely want to win. And what their motive is their motive to maintain corporatism? Is their motive to get rid of Trump, but still maintain corporatism? Like, it's hard to know what their motive is.
Right. I mean, obviously we're 6 months out from an election. We can't know what's going to happen. Neither you or I are clairvoyant, but it does seem that a candidate like Biden, who faces the kinds of allegations he faces, or even if it's just one sexual assault allegation, the fact that multiple women have said, he made me uncomfortable. Like, he acted in a way, he touched me in a way that made me uncomfortable. Like, that's a pattern.
Well, I see that. And honestly, my understanding was even when he was confronted with this behavior within the past year, he was somewhat kind of like dismissive and condescending about it, even at one point mocking it in terms of touching a kid and saying, "Oh, don't worry, I got permission." Like, as if somehow we're all just so oversensitive that way because we just, and that to me, again, goes to this sort of entitlement. So instead of actually feeling like, oh, I made some people feel uncomfortable, maybe I should reevaluate and have a little self-awareness. Instead, you have mockery of the situation, to me, which exemplifies more entitlement. So, but I want to be very clear that my issues or why I wasn't a fan of Joe Biden was long before any of this. I mean, to me, the biggest thing is the crime bill. That is where I've seen the most impact in my life and my career. And that to me is it's kind of unforgivable. And the fact that—
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, about the 94 crime bill.
And your experience with it.
Well, I mean, when you look at the amount of people and how over incarcerated we are, and we are over incarcerated, and we know that we are, again, we have a profit motive in incarceration. So yet another area that has been completely, stained by a profit motive. And when you look at the disproportionate effects of criminal justice, and I say justice loosely, in this country, and how it affects poor people, disenfranchised people of color, brown people. And, we got to at least address a little bit of that when Bloomberg was in the race regarding his stop and frisk policies. But that's tip of the iceberg. The 94 crime bill that is the reason that we have the largest penal colony in the world. That is the reason why you have things like 3 strikes and you're out, and you've got for-profit prisons, and you've got basically a machine that takes people from school to prison. I mean, we call it the school to prison pipeline, but it really is. And it was set up that way by design for profit. And Joe Biden was a big part of that. I mean, he wrote that crime bill, and the fact that he still doesn't even second guess it, even though we know the devastating effects that this has had on generations of people of color unnecessarily. And we're talking for nonviolent drug offenses, for things that a lot of people that are white wouldn't have even been prosecuted for. So when you look at the disproportionate effect of that, and he still won't acknowledge that, and in fact, now goes on even in his rebuttal to the Tara Reade claim and goes about his "I supported the Violence Against Women Act." Yeah, as part of the '94 crime bill, which has ruined the lives of millions of people. So, if that's your best example of being supportive of women while throwing entire communities under the bus, it's just not sufficient for me.
Well, yeah, I would imagine. It does not sound like you're a big fan of Joe Biden's. Do you worry that having him if you win your primary, do you worry that having Biden at the top of the ticket will depress turnout in elections? Obviously, you are in a very safe blue district,
Yeah.
but in elections where maybe there's not such a safe blue district.
Absolutely. But we can also look at the potential opposite effect, which is something that I think will happen down here. Now, if I am able to beat Debbie in the August primary, and that it is me going in November, that will generate a lot more enthusiasm from our local voter base than Debbie would going into that election, right? So me being on the ballot and stirring up people like all the students and the teenagers and the climate activists and all of those people, and just the idea of something new and novel, and that I think will actually inspire people to come out and vote that might not have otherwise come out and even voted for somebody like Joe Biden. So I'm not sure the effect of what has with what, but I don't think that him on the ticket is a winning strategy for the Democrats at this point.
Well, I definitely appreciate you taking the time and speaking with me, and weighing in on this issue, and which is so contentious at the moment.
I'm probably going to get crucified for this. I'm sure. I'll be reading the negative comments from all the people that all they want to do is get rid of Trump and Trump, and.
Well, okay. So wait, before I let you go, let's talk about let's get into this a little bit, for maybe the benefit of those people, or or whatever. But let's talk about Democrats blame Trump, I think rightly, for a lot of the things that he has done. And one of those, we talked a little bit earlier about the coronavirus and how we were unprepared, and his administration obviously did not help that. In fact, they actively harmed our early response. They did not push for early testing. They refused tests from the World Health Organization. A whole number of things. He fired the pandemic response team in 2018. Right. Like, these are very basic things. But underneath that, you had systemic problems, systemic holes that we discussed. The loss of domestic manufacturing. So no supply chains for medical supplies.
No paid sick leave for employees.
Paid sick leave. The healthcare system that's for profit, that people can't see a doctor when they're sick. So there are a lot of systemic problems, I think, that even the best prepared administration, even if he had put in orders for ventilators back in January or December, these problems would still happen. We would still be hit by these problems. And I think we see that across a number of issues where Donald Trump has done things that are harmful, but the systemic problems, I think, are perhaps a little bigger than his immediate response. Do you find it disheartening trying to explain that to people? Extremely.
It's one of the most frustrating things over the past 3 years that people like me have been dealing with, is the I hate to say it, but the Trump derangement syndrome, because it's a complete distraction from what the actual problems are. And I think it's really, look, historically people like a villain. They need a bad guy. They like to be able to have one person to blame. And if only we get rid of him, then everything will be fine. Or if only Hillary had won, then everything would be fine. And I think that just simplifies things for people in their own minds, because they just really cannot wrap their head around that they have been participating in the rot of our system for the past 40, 50 years. It was hard for me to acknowledge this. I mean, I voted for Bill Clinton twice. I voted for Barack Obama twice. And these are not necessarily choices that I would make again now. And I see the flawed thinking in that then, but when you know better, you do better. And so I've reached a point where I recognize that that's just not the way to go. But Trump is a symptom of a very, very sick collective. And the collective, and not to get all hippy dippy Marianne Williamson or kind of thing like that, but sorry about the dogs.
No,
but,
it's okay.
But the reality is that there is an interconnectedness to everything. And the way I see it is that every human being on the planet, there's a cost of existence, right? You're either paying to educate them or incarcerate them. You're feeding them or you're burying them. Every human being has a cost associated with their existence. And when you don't count that as part of your just overall cost of civilization, you're misreading the situation, because you're paying for people one way or another. So our whole system is very sick. We don't prioritize things that we should prioritize. We prioritize money. We prioritize fame. We prioritize things that are basically show late stage capitalism to me. And I am not against capitalism. I'm really not. I am for capitalism, but certain things should not be for profit. Healthcare, public education, and corrections should never be for profit. And right now, those three things are for profit, and they're killing us. So Trump, to blame it on Trump, it's really like, I mean, it's so short-sighted. And I think, and it scares me that if people do that, then they're never going to really get to the root of the problem. You're not going to address the issues. I think that if Hillary had won, most people would have just put their heads back in the sand. We would have continued business as usual, and we would inevitably get to where we are now. It just might have taken longer. So I kind of saw it like a Band-Aid situation, because corporatism is rotting us. And it doesn't matter who the person sitting in the Oval Office is with that going on in the background. So I guess I see the interconnectedness of it all more than a lot of people might. And it's the same way I was saying, you're only as healthy as your sickest person. If you're healthy, but there's sick people all around you, what good is that?
Well, there's sort of a push that's been happening towards radicalism. And it's a connection that I think was very recognized a few years ago, but then Trump beat Hillary Clinton, and a lot of Democrats, I think, stopped wanting to put, the economic anxiety became sort of a running joke, because if you ask Trump voters what motivated them, it was social anxiety. Or their reasons were social reasons.
I got a lot of immigrant reasons. A lot of the Trump supporters are very supportive of him regarding immigration.
Right. But at their core, these issues are fundamentally connected to economics and a perception of scarcity. And I think that's something, as a Jewish American, I'm very sensitive to sort of what we're seeing now, the radicalism that we're seeing now, the people taking up arms and occupying state houses. Like that is radicalism. And whatever they say, whatever their reasons may be, that appeals to more people today as we are feeling this squeeze than it did 4 years ago, when we weren't in the middle of the worst economic crisis that we've ever faced.
Of course.
And that scares me. So that's why it's refreshing for me to talk to candidates who are who are progressives and who are coming up and trying to at least change the national conversation, and at least get these issues, talked about, and maybe get these policies implemented that would lift up struggling people. So, because if you feel like you have a stake in the status quo, you're going to fight to protect it. We're seeing that now at the highest levels of the Democratic Party. What we want to be seeing is that, and I think you might agree with this, we want to see that at the bottom, where people who live and work in America feel like they have a stake in keeping the system functioning.
And what really changed that was the Democrats turning away from labor. And that was one of the biggest shifts that put us where we are now. I mean, you used to have something like at least a third of the workforce, or maybe even more, was union, and now you've got like less than 10% or something. I mean, it's so low, and we have completely gone back to the types of abuses and things that we were doing to workers back when like Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle. You hear about these things going on in like Amazon distribution centers, and just it's really unbelievable that we're still having to deal with this concept of people are deserving of basic dignity, right? Like there needs to be this basic social safety net that all human beings are entitled to: food, clothing, shelter, education. And the fact that we just cannot come to agree on that as a whole, it's the same concept as healthcare as a human right. Like we need people to understand that everybody is entitled to dignity. Nobody should have to work more than a 40-hour-a-week job in order to live. That's not a thriving society. That is a very sick civilization. And we need people to understand that, but we've been abused for so long. Like we have like battered spouse syndrome, where we just don't think we deserve any better. And I just, more and more people, I hope, I'm cautiously optimistic, are starting to recognize that they deserve better.
Right. You said it before, that these policies are not radical. They are popular. They are supported by a majority of even Republicans. It's just people at the top, and that is the we have a stake in this, and we don't want to let it go. But Jen Perelman, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much. Are you, when you push this out there, will my information be? And I know I've got my website up here, but like social media stuff?
Yeah, I can do that.
Because we do need volunteers. We need people to go to Gen 2020, sign up for phone banking. Obviously, we'd love donations, but right now we just need a massive phone banking game.
Well, you all heard it here. Thank you very much. Best of luck to you and your family.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe, and your husband. Hopefully
he's pretty good. I mean, you know what? And that's the thing, is that doctors are also infinitely more prepared in terms of just regular habits. Like he never touches his face. He never, there's just certain things that are such a habit for him, just coming in and out of sterile environment, that just makes him so much better equipped to just be safe, that is second nature to him and not to the rest of us.
Well, I hope that everybody, that you and your loved ones remain safe through this crisis, and I hope that Florida is spared what we are seeing here in New York.
I do too. We have a lot of old people here.
Yeah. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. You too.
I'm going to end this recording.